Europe is enduring a third spell of sweltering heat this week that continues to strain public health systems, trigger wildfires, and underscore the growing impact of climate change. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Wednesday, July 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Is the extreme summer weather a new normal for Europe? Now, this is the question we seek to answer today. And for this, I have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio. Chloe, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I also have freelance journalist David Cox over in the UK with us. David, it's been too long. Thank you for joining us live. Good to have you on, my friend.
Great to be back on Arirang.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Chloe, let's begin with the severity of the scorching heat in France and its deadly consequences.
Yeah, so today and until at least the end of the week, France is in a new heat wave. So it's orange alert, so that's not the worst level that we can get. We can get up to red at the moment on most of France. Temperatures are going to raise up and above the 40 degrees Celsius. But the last heat wave in France was at the end of June, and I think it's the one that we need to talk about more because it was the most important one this year. So 3/4 of France were under the red alert system for 2 days with temperature well over the 40 degrees Celsius this time. And we can compare it to 2003. That was the very big heat wave that's really well remembered by French people because it was at that time a very historic record-breaking actually heat wave. The temperature in late June this year have been higher than the 2003 heat wave. There's been, the death toll is expected to be not as high as 2003. At the time, there was about 15,000 the heat deaths related. They're thinking there will be less people this time because also we have learned from our mistakes. And the system, especially in retirement houses for the older people, but also in hospital, have been improved to try to be able to fight and give a good response to heat wave related problems. For example, in 2025, there was also a heat wave, not as strong as this one, but still quite strong. And there were about 5,700 deaths that were attributed to this, so about 3 times less, so showing that it's been an improvement. But still, if we look at the Paris region this year, the APHP, so that's the Paris Public Hospital network, they've been at the peak of the heat wave. They say that the emergency departments treated over a third of the normal amount of people that were supposed to be treated at that time, with a large portion of the people were above 75 years old needing hospitalization because of the heat. And even the phone calls to their medical dispatch centers were up nearly 80% compared to the same period on 2025. And there's been the recent countdown for that period, but it's still not finished. But the French Public Health Agency said that over 2,000 additional deaths would be included in that specific week of heat wave. So that's plus 29% compared to the usual periods.
Right. This being said, David, I understand health authorities in the UK have also issued alerts with regard to the heat there. What have they been saying?
Yes, so basically this is our third heat wave of the year, and it's not quite as warm as the one we had last month, but the key thing is it's the longest. So we've got temperatures of more than 30 degrees, which is set to continue for 10 days. So basically what health authorities are saying is exactly the same as earlier in the year. So it's basically, just advising people to stay hydrated, do what they can to keep their homes cool, and just stay out of the sun between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. But beyond that, they're not really offering much else at the moment.
David, I wonder, how are you coping with the blistering heat there in the UK?
Well, fortunately, I live in Brighton, which is by the sea, which is something of a relief at this time of the year, but it is absolutely baking, I can tell you. It is 9:30 in the morning right now, and it is already sweltering. I mean, London is just an unbearable place to be when it's this hot. I mean, the main reason is so many buildings are built during the 1700s and the 1800s, so they're designed to retain heat rather than be cool in hot temperatures. So that's a big issue. And, you know, as you know, like a lot of our homes just simply don't have air conditioning. Only 40% of the London Underground even has air conditioning. So a lot of places are just so hot, you know, and it's very hard to cope. And as in Seoul, you know, we also have this problem in a lot of our big cities of the urban heat island effect, which is where, you know, there's so many densely packed buildings. The sun's rays are being absorbed by buildings rather than greenery, which then just radiate out more heat and make the problem worse. So, you know, we had probably like some of our worst ever heat wave back in 2022 when temperatures topped 40 degrees. And I think it was no surprise that more than a tenth of the deaths caused by that were in the capital.
Right, right. So true. Chloe, with regard to coping with the sweltering summer in Europe, you mentioned hospitals in Paris being under strain. I also hear mortuaries are under pressure as well. Could you tell us a bit more about the situation there?
Yeah, I've got quite a few French colleagues, journalists who have been working on this story. What they've been saying is that the mortuaries had to, so again, speaking about the latest heat wave in June, they had to refuse some deceased people's body because they were already at full capacity a few days after the first heat wave. And we know that quite a few people are actually, it takes time for the family to be able to get the bodies to put them in mortuary. So that means that the situation was getting harder and harder the more days that were coming in. The French Public Health Agency said that 85% of the deaths registered so far during the 3 days of the heat wave at the end of June were involving people above 65 years old and older, and that there was a sharp increase in deaths at home. So up by about 40%, especially in the Paris region. It's a bit like for England, actually. Paris is obviously a very big city, very dense with old buildings as well. So that was probably where it was the hardest to cope with the heat. And in Paris, again, where the journalists have been able to go around and talk with mortuary rooms owners, they were saying that they quickly run out of place. And so the city hall has been setting temporary storage in Paris. They've been also opening municipal mortuaries with more spaces, some as well into the hospitals, kind of emergency places. And some people have been saying that they had to store the bodies out of Paris up to 80 kilometers out. So that's not even the suburbs of Paris anymore. We're completely out of the city. And that's what they had to do to try and find solutions for the people. And this was one mortuary room owner that was interviewed by French journalists to actually say that also it's putting more hardest time for the families, the bereaved families, because you're already grieving the loss of a close one and you still have to deal with finding a space to be able to put the body to rest for some times. So they were also saying that you have to have empathy for the families as well and realize like it's double grief for them.
Yeah, oh my goodness, that is so sad, of course. David, earlier you spoke about how buildings in London were built to retain heat back in the 17th century and 18th century. Is that why the AP claims that outdated schoolhouses there in the UK are aggravating conditions for school children?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's a problem in schools and also in hospitals as well. You know, last month we had some hospitals got so hot that the IT systems just completely went down. And obviously in schools as well, a lot of our schools have very poor ventilation. So a lot of windows are sealed. You can't open them for safety reasons. So you can just imagine it just becomes impossible to get cool air in. And also, you know, a lot of our schools are fairly small rooms. You've got up to 40 children in a classroom. So we had some of these reports last month of teachers fainting in the classroom, and a lot of schools simply responded by just sending children home en masse and advising them not to come into school. I mean, we don't know whether we're going to see the same over the next 10 days, potentially. You know, it's a big problem, though, because obviously a lot of parents are at work, and so the fact that children aren't going to school causes a lot of disruption. And so, you know, we need to find better solutions to this, because this problem of high temperatures during the summer is probably only going to get worse rather than better in the future.
Right, that is what pundits are saying, of course. Chloe, I hear in Paris, authorities there have banned alcohol in the city. Could you tell us a bit about this and the public response?
Yeah, so the idea was during heat wave, they have been asking bars, like pubs and restaurants, to not sell alcohol, to go. So that's what people do sometimes. And as I was saying, Paris is quite hot. And so a lot of people actually, in the summertime, after work, you'll just go with your friend in some of the specific areas that are next to the Seine or close to other areas, a bit like the Hankang River here in Korea. And the idea is you go there and you'll have a drink or two or more with your friends, enjoying the evening, avoiding going back to your overheated place. And so that's been asked of the pubs to not sell alcohol for the streets, and then to people to not drink alcohol in the public venues. So the idea is that they are saying that there's actually, between the heat, the fatigue as well, that you could get from a few days of not sleeping well, because temperatures are not going down as well during the night. So, and then the fact that obviously people are going to get drunk close to the water, they're saying that it's heightening the risk of accidents, where the emergency and the hospital are already under a lot of pressure, so there's no need to add preventable accidents to that. As for the response, obviously it was not so positive. There's, in the articles that I've been able to read, where they are asking people in the streets what they think about it, a lot of people are just saying like that they can just go through the rules and just go, you know, it's supposed to be at 6 p.m. the rule of not having alcohol taken out. So they were saying like, well, you just go to the supermarket before that, or restaurants as well and pubs who have been under a lot of financial pressure during the COVID pandemics, because most of the rules were applying for them for the longest. I've been saying that it's also money that is going to be lost for them, because if people are not buying with them, they'll probably find another way or another place to go get their alcohol. So for now, I would say that, yeah, the answer from the French people was not that positive.
Right. Who would have thought that the summer heat would ban the sale of alcohol in Paris? David, here in South Korea, there have been rampant reports, local media reports about public anger there in the UK amid an order for homes to remove air conditioning. Could you clarify this for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, you know, such a good example of how the UK just simply isn't prepared at all for hot temperatures. So, you know, there's a lot of rules, particularly in some councils in London, that for flats, you know, people should prioritize what we call passive cooling. So using fans or opening windows to cool their homes rather than air conditioning units. And, you know, some of the arguments are valid. So obviously, air conditioning is very energy intensive. So there are concerns that if the entire country just, you know, bought air conditioning units for their homes, it would cause mass power outages, things like that. Also, as well, we know that air conditioning does produce more CO2. So obviously, if the UK turned to aircon en masse, you know, that would potentially just worsen some of the factors which are causing these heat waves long term. At the same time, though, you know, I feel we need to be realistic and practical. You know, we're getting to a point where we're seeing these temperatures of, you know, exceeding 35 degrees in the UK pretty much every summer now. And we know that this is deadly for older people in particular. You know, even young people, even relatively healthy people, it can either trigger or exacerbate underlying health conditions. You know, I've done a lot of research into some of the health effects of extreme heat, and it can trigger things like sleep apnea, which is a chronic sleep problem which can lead to a lot of different long-term health conditions. So, you know, I think we need to maybe move to a place where, you know, it becomes a bit more acceptable for people, particularly the vulnerable, to have air conditioning. But, you know, at the moment, the UK is still a little bit stuck in the past.
David, there in Brighton, do you have air conditioning at home, or is it cool enough there?
No, not. I wish I had air conditioning, Sunny. Like, honestly, yeah, I could really do with it right now. I've just got like a very old school fan here, which is what's keeping me going. And the fact I can go to the sea is a little bit of a relief. But you know, I don't know. Maybe if this continues, I will have to purchase a unit.
Right. Chloe, back here in the studio. Reports also here in South Korea talked about wildfires in southern France. Could you tell us what's the latest on that front? I understand the fires also affected the Tour de France arrangement, the tour itself, was it?
Yeah, so the thing is, so the fire is still ongoing from what I heard, like from the latest update in early morning in France before coming into the studio. So it's in the Pyrénées-Oriental department. So it's the very south of France at the border with Spain. And actually this year the Tour de France started in Spain, as they do sometimes start in other countries to start with. And they were, so that's the third stage, and that was the first one that was happening in France, and they were supposed to arrive in France, which they did actually. They did arrive, obviously. But what they said is that they thought it would be too dangerous to have people on the roads cheering for the team. So they asked the arrival to be without any spectators. So no viewers were allowed to be there. And there's also another thing is there's the publicity caravan that's always like, it's kind of the cars from the sponsors of the tour who are passing before the riders, and they'll just be like throwing away presents and small like funny stuff like food or little souvenirs actually from the tour, and people who are gathered there usually get them. And at this time they asked the caravan to not do the last 40 kilometers. That's kind of also a way to make sure that people would not be coming, because there won't be that part. So they say, like the organizers say, that they were kind of sad, obviously saddened that the first part of the Tour de France in France was without any viewers, but they say that the security was the most important element. Actually, France is right now dealing with quite a lot of fires. There's been 6 other parts of France where there's fires going on. One new one that just started yesterday, around midday. And it's say that it's a very difficult season this year for wildfires on France, because the summer is always a dry season for us. So it's kind of usual for even most of Europe actually to have the wildfire right now. But what they were saying is they started a month earlier than usual in France. And there's been a lot of winds that make it very impossible to control. So it's already more than 11,000 hectares that have burnt in all of 2026. And it was 5,700 at this time in 2025. So that's quite impressive. And there's still 7 regions that are considered at high risk of wildfire, so more could still start. And there is help coming in, because the good thing with Europe is that there's a specific fund that's made so that firemen from other countries that are not yet affected can help. So there's help coming from Cyprus and from Sweden as well. And even other regions, for example, Normandy, that is in the north, has been able to send firemen as well to help with the other region at the moment. But it's still really hard and very hard to predict how the fires are going to go at the moment.
Right. David, scientists have been saying that climate change, it's going to make European heat waves even more intense. How is this message influencing public opinion there in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, climate breakdown is heating Europe faster than any other continent, and we are feeling the brunt of that right now. I mean, at the same time, I'm sure Chloe would agree, because I think it's a similar picture in France, but climate change has long been a heavily politicized issue here. But I feel maybe over the last few years, it has perhaps just begun to change like a little bit, and more people have begun to wake up to the fact that this is, an ongoing public health problem which isn't going to go away. We haven't had, thankfully, wildfires in the UK, but we've had sort of unusual things such as, major sporting events have had to take heat breaks for the first time, which is the kind of thing I've only really typically seen in the States or in Australia, that never normally happens in the UK. So I think people are starting to become, more and more aware of that this is an ongoing issue. At the same time, though, it's so heavily tied in with politics. And, I don't know whether Chloe agrees, but obviously the far-right parties are becoming more and more popular across the continent at the moment, and their mantra is both promoting air conditioning, but also preventing the adoption of clean energy projects, the solar, the wind power, these kind of projects, which, could make a long-term difference to the problem, because, ultimately this is man-made, it's man-driven, we need to shift away from fossil fuels, and, that requires political action.
Right, and if you don't move away from fossil fuels, there are experts who claim that such extreme summer heat will become a new normal for Europe. What are French authorities doing to prepare for this kind of reality?
Yeah, so I would like to start with an expert in France who's been making a lot of waves, because she said she was part of the French Climate Council that's not any longer in place. But on public radio recently, she had a very hard striking sentence that's in the way of what you were saying. She was saying the coolest years to come will probably be as hot as this year. So as in, you say the new normal, but the new normal at a very high level. So I feel like quite a lot of my friends and relatives in France have been saying this sentence. I think it's been like doing shockwaves into the society. Europe, exceptional weather events that we're seeing are going to be more and more normal and more frequent. So there's a thing for the climate experts that have been interviewed recently. They've been saying that they were disappointed in the past, that the alert that they were raising have never been listened to too much. I will agree with what David was saying about politicization on the climate question. And what they're saying is that it was, according to these experts, minimized by the French politicians quite a lot until now, where we can't minimize it anymore because we're seeing the effects every year. There's already directions that are being taken. So French authorities want to do something on urbanization, for example. So having what they call cooler oases in the cities, where you will have trees, you will have buildings that are made also that's help cooling down, and also like the regulation will go by itself. There's also the idea of better insulation of buildings. As we were saying again, like the old buildings are not doing well in winter and in summer, so trying to help that, and also or even adaptation in agricultural fields, for example. But next year for us is the political campaign, like the presidential campaign. So I think like quite a few pundits are actually thinking that it might be one of the questions, let's hope at least that this summer will put the climate change and the climate adaptation question at the center of the campaign. It's not always the case, but we've seen, same as in the United Kingdom, actually some more far-right parties who have been taking the idea of the air conditioning, of not green energy, everything, and quite a few people who have been saying that the Green parties actually, because they are against air conditioning, I'm making it very simple because it's not what is going on, but would be part of the reason why people are not well adapted and well prepared. So we'll need to see how it will go, and if next year people still remind this summer, keep it in mind for next year campaign.
Right, I suppose we'll have to wait and see the next year it is for France. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Chloe, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
David, over in the UK, stay cool, stay healthy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow.